Tom, thanks for sitting down. We did this about a year ago.
Just over.
So let's start broadly. How are you? How are you today? How are you feeling?
Good, yeah. Traumatic change in my life in the last sort of 3 or 4 months, I think. Obviously finished up playing footy, got engaged, gone back to full-time uni, playing local footy, doing a bit of work. So I'm sort of back as a regular Joe now. It's kind of nice, actually.
Well, it's nice to see a big smile on your face. The professional footy career has had the extreme ups and downs, of which the public have some idea about, and I've probably got maybe a little bit more insight, but clearly that's not the whole picture. We're going to cover a heap of ground. I want to go right back to the start, but can you articulate, was there a low point in the last 5 or 6 years that you could pinpoint, or is it just a period of time that was
it depends
tough?
It depends what you define by low point. Obviously my struggles in 2017 are pretty well documented, but if you're talking about my relationship with footy, it was pretty early on that I didn't have, a hugely positive relationship with football. I mean, moving away to Sydney and, big change in my life, big change straight after school where I was extremely comfortable, highly touted, sort of never really had any super difficult challenge to overcome in my footy besides sort of, one injury. It's been a fickle relationship, I'd say. And I'd say my good parts probably covered up a lot of the bad parts and sort of bought me a bit of time more than anything. But, I probably thought about retiring when I was in Sydney in my first sort of 6 months. So,
did you ever love the game?
I love the game. The game of footy, as you know, it's a different breed at the professional level. I mean, the joy or the freedom that you get playing footy as a junior and as a local footballer to a degree, and being able to wash your hands of it at the end of the day and go home and be normal again, that's different. That's really different. And, to be honest, it was probably my naivety coming in that made me surprised. Particularly at the Giants, it was a funny old sort of club at the time. 3rd year in the system and full of high draft picks and a lot of sort of insecurity players trying to find their way and trying to sort of step over each other, but really trying to gel together from a group of boys who'd been, the big fish in a small pond before they got there. So I think that was my first shock coming into the system. And then from there, you get more used to it, but then after a while, I think there's a point where you realise that maybe this isn't for you. And once that idea got in my head, it was very hard to shake.
I'd love to spend a bit of time talking about. So you just your relationship with footy, and that's got a few facets to it. But you just touched on it then, and a lot of players that I've spoken with, there's a distinct change when it goes from that childhood where you play and it's in the moment and you win or lose and there's good or bad, but then you can leave it, and the professional world of it being filmed, critiqued, judged, and sort of poured back over again and again. Did you feel that shift in your own thinking of it? It took away something.
Yeah, some of the brilliance. Yeah, I think so. I mean, so I've told this to a few people, even in the public sort of sphere, a few times. So when I was in high school, I'd obviously started getting quite a bit of recognition. I mean, I was captain of the Vic Metro side when I was 15, 16, and then sort of played bottom age and over age. So I was right in the sort of thick of it from a media perspective, from a draft point of view. And then there was the storyline of Patton had kind of gone 2 years before, and they were going to have 2 number 1 draft picks in 3 years, both big key forwards, same club. So I think towards the end of my schooling, my school sort of ended up being my release rather than, really thrilled to go and, kick the footy around on the weekend. It was more like, all right, now I get to go back and be normal. Because there was scouts at all of my games. There was people asking me, even for photos and, on a much less degree than I obviously had throughout my professional career. But it was a big shock, and suddenly I felt like I was under the watchful eye of the footy world to a degree, even from a 15, 16-year-old. So then, I think my priorities shifted a little bit then. And at the time, I I didn't realise per se, but it became more apparent to me as I went through footy that I needed something fulfilling outside the game. Otherwise, I was just going to go stir crazy. So.
Take me right back to the start. I know we've talked in broad terms about growing up and your underage footy career is, as you say, there was more spotlight on you than most other young kids, and your time in the AFL, the spotlight was very bright. What were you like as a little kid?
I love footy. I love sport in general. Spent a lot of time down the beach as well, surfing and mucking around in the sun down in Anglesea.
You a happy kid?
Happy kid. Tall kid. Obviously, we covered that in the last podcast, so that was a funny experience, being taller than my Year 5 buddy when I was at school. So I had a little bit of a funny sort of childhood from that sense. I mean, you talk about big fish, small pond. When you're at a primary school of 150 kids and you're a really good sportsman, it's like the smallest of ponds, I suppose. But yeah, I was a happy kid, loved playing sport, played a lot of basketball. I suppose a funny point, I had a very pragmatic relationship with AFL even from a young age. Like, it was almost like I saw it as a career rather than because I was sort of tossing up between basketball and footy all through my childhood, and basketball's a lot less forgiving with time. So you have to train for basketball. You have to play. You can't not play domestic because otherwise you can't represent you at representative level. You can't play for Nuttawatting or Ringwood like I did. And then so I sort of put footy on the back burner whilst I still played and still really enjoyed it. But I always knew, I was like, I'll come back to footy. Yeah. And that's what I want to pursue, which is strange because I reckon I had that thought from 7 or 8 years old, which is a very strange thing to think about.
I can understand that.
Yeah.
So, but I find it interesting. So, even at a young age, you were thinking in terms of career.
Yeah,
that's pretty
weird.
How old would you have been when you started thinking?
Yeah, 7 or 8, I reckon.
7 or 8.
I mean, as in,
I wouldn't have even known what a career was.
Well, as in, I want to be a professional footballer.
Yeah,
it wasn't necessarily. I just want to play footy forever.
But was it, I want to be like those guys on the TV, or I want that to be?
I don't know. I mean, I think it probably developed over time because as it becomes more realistic, there's obviously sort of a spike in realization that you might be able to turn it into a career. But I was not a massive player fan. Like, I didn't follow Wayne Carey or Tom Hawkins. I didn't just follow them religiously. I sort of was a real big appreciative of the game. Yeah. So I love watching all teams. I mean, I barracked for Carlton, but they weren't much good. So I appreciated watching the better sides. And I think from that perspective, I got a very professional relationship with the game at a young age, which sort of takes the joy out of it, I think, a little bit.
Which is why I asked you if did you ever love the game? Seems like there's an appreciation but I'm intrigued as to whether there was a pure joy.
Hard to say because
could you mark it against basketball, or was there a joy when you played basketball?
Not like footy. No, basketball's talk about being professional from a young age. That's a funny game. That's a really funny game.
The coaching's pretty intense.
Yeah, and there's a lot of coaches who are post not quite professional careers. And a lot of them are very short, so they're all got a bit sort of the world's out to get them a little bit. Yeah. So their relationship with the game is, it's rough for a lot of kids. And I know a lot of kids have had, really bad experiences with basketball. So from the footy point of view, I think that's where I got some of my enjoyment, sort of a little, contrastingly to basketball. It was probably less professional and more fun. But then I would also point out that obviously I was going quite well. So were you enjoying just being better than people, or enjoying the game, or what was it? So I probably hard to put my finger on, but I didn't get challenged from a physical standpoint or a professional football standpoint until I got into the AFL. Yeah, it was significantly more prepared to do the work outside of the program when I was younger than a lot of my teammates and a lot of my opposition, so that helped. And then I was naturally gifted in size and mobility and skills,
talent, size, and you had the passion and work ethic to...
Yeah, so I probably had a massive gap, whereas once I got to the AFL, everyone was like that, and then my size wasn't as distinctive. So, I mean, that was always, commentary that I heard coming through. And I mean, it's a valid point, but you can only play against the people that you sort of get a chance to. So,
can I ask you, what was it like? And you know, this is where we both went through the same experience. But so you're a kid in the eastern suburbs. When you became aware that clubs were interested in you, and you're on the verge of the draft, for you, was that exciting? So when a letter comes in the mailbox from a club or from management, was there a thrill for you, or was it sort of tainted with a little bit of dread?
Probably not so much the clubs, because I didn't actually get that many, because most of them were pretty certain that they weren't going to get a go at me. But the management ones, early days, so there was a little bit of competition at the Eastern Rangers when we were sort of 16, end of the Vic Metro Carnival. A few boys started getting management letters, and that's where sort of I was like, oh, this is sort of, you know, getting a bit more serious now. Yeah. Which, looking back, you're like, anyone can send a management letter ever. It's not really meaning much. But yeah, I didn't have that much interaction with clubs per se. I probably only spoke to, over my journey, I don't know, 10 of them maybe. Was it exciting though, the idea that you were sort of knocking on the door of the, you know, professional football? Did it give you a bit of a thrill of like, okay, I'm about to be welcomed into this world, or was it? Yeah, I enjoyed the process, because I was good at it. I was really good at interviewing. I was sort of had a really good family behind me, so whenever people spoke to me, there was no judgment, or I didn't have to explain anything. I was doing well at school. Yeah. So there was I just enjoyed it because I was good at it, you know. And there was so much compliments, and like, I mean, I even remember a mate interviewing me, and we got along really well from the first time we met. So I think from that point of view, the thrill of it wasn't so much a big part. I mean, for some people it is, particularly guys who come late, like through the draft late. I know, like, so Dan McStay played his 100th game on the weekend. He started getting a lot more notoriety as he came to top age under 18s. And I think it was a real thrill for the sort of guys who start spiking late, because they're sort of on this big continuum of...
They get the double bounce, the trampoline
exponentially increasing in all facets of their footy. But because I was sort of... I'd had a relationship with sort of interleague or state teams from a really young age. It was sort of a slower burn. Yeah. And like I said, I was sort of good at it. So
yeah. So tell me about, so you get drafted, the showbiz of the draft. You get wheeled out. You go to the Giants, and you mentioned before that, like, pretty soon. I mean, you're in that first 2 years. You could tell me when, but already thoughts of you say retirement. So clearly falling out of love with the whole show.
Or maybe I'm not sure I fell in love with the professional side of things. So it's interesting. So I got offered a 2-year extension by the Giants in January, I think, January or February, like when we just come back from Christmas break. And straight away I was like, no, why would I re-sign? I haven't even played a game. Like, I don't know what footy life's, you know. And that's one of the traps that I think a lot of young boys fall into, is they get 2 years and then we'll just automatically sign for the third. Well, I mean, that seems like a good idea and you're extending your career, but if you've moved into state, you're not sure what playing is like, because the pre-season's dramatically different. I mean, everyone who's played will always tell you that. And to a larger degree, it's a lot easier. I mean, from a fitness point of view, it's harder, but you don't have any pressure, particularly before Christmas.
It's a simple life in some ways, pre-season.
And there's a lot of camaraderie,
work, recover,
sun, hang out on the weekend. You got a bit more time. Yeah. You're not worried about every session.
Everyone's in the team too.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone's on top of the ladder.
And then about the end of January, it's all of a sudden it starts sort of
nothing spiraling. Like when that first team gets picked. It's like, oh, noses out of joint.
6 years sitting in those meeting rooms going, he's not in, I'm not in, or whatever it was. And I think that was probably the point where I was like, I'm not sure I want to stay in Sydney. And I've sort of spoken about it to a few groups of people. There's this weird relationship that the AFL has with homesickness, and it's a bit of a dangerous one in my opinion, because even before I got drafted, I'd heard the word. You know, it's always talked about in trades and when people go into state, and it's like it's this real thing. You know, it's like tangible. Yeah. So when I went up there and I started having issues, and I started having issues with sleep, and I was getting stressed, and I didn't like being particularly the sort of the environment I was in per se, because it was a big challenge for me, being the high pick and then sort of having to deal with the expectation, and then there was this weird relationship being a full forward, and there was many layers to it. But
was that pressure from teammates, do you think, or
it might have been
on
just
yourself?
in my own head? I'm not sure. I mean, the media pressure is significantly less up there, particularly at that time. There was probably like a tiny little skinny column in the paper every day, if that, and the Swans sort of dominated the media a bit more than we did. But so my first thought when I had issues was, it's just homesickness. And and then so being logical, I was like, well, moving home would help, obviously. And so I'd sort of thought about, maybe that's an option for me, particularly at an early stage, which is not a good thought to have, because it's sort of very infectious.
How soon are we talking?
Well, when they offered me that deal, I was like, I'm not sure I want to stay past 2 years. That's January.
So January,
3 months.
So post you've been drafted in November.
Yeah.
So you're 2 months in.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and it wasn't like I want to leave now, but it was, I'm not signing on for 2 more years in this current sort of state.
Yeah. So with the benefit of hindsight, what do you see that as the first symptoms of what we'll get into later with the mental health?
I mean, I don't know. It's the line from Inception. I mean, there's nothing more infectious than an idea. I mean, once you convince yourself of something, or you sort of get convinced that this is not for you, it's very hard to sort of shake it.
Yeah.
And the reason why I bring up homesickness is because I attributed everything that I had issues with up until I really had issues to homesickness. And the problem with that is that if you're a young player and you move into state, you ignore everything and just put it under the same umbrella.
Yeah, it's under the... Yeah.
And that can be really detrimental, because it means you don't deal with it. Yeah. And you just think, I'm just homesick, I'm homesick. And
once I remedy that, everything will be fine.
And I've even seen it in the paper recently. This is just a common word that, is a buzzword in the industry, which I genuinely feel like, to me, it attributed to me ignoring my issues for a long time. So, I think we've got some work to do in that area.
Yeah. So let's go to... So you play 2 years with GWS, end up playing how many games?
No, 1 year. 1 year.
Yeah, 1 year. Yeah, sorry, 1 year. And then all hell breaks loose down here at Footscray, and the big moves are made to get you back here. What do you remember around that time?
Well, I'd been in communication with the club earlier in the year, and they'd signalled interest, and they, to be honest, I think they'd sort of tried to suss out if there was any chance the year before, though I'm not sure what that would have looked like. I don't think the Giants were in any mood to make any decision like that. So I'd sort of had the idea, but ultimately, I'd spoken to Liam, my manager, and he was like, there's no way they're going to trade you for anything less than, say, Griffin or something like that.
Yep.
And which obviously at the time was like, it's never going to happen.
Yep.
So I'd sort of resigned myself to playing another year. I'd gone away. I was in Indonesia, and the dial-up Wi-Fi or whatever we had over there at the time was limited, but there was a few guys from Australia over there, and we were flicking through the trade news, and then all of a sudden I got a couple of texts in the morning, and Dad tried to call me, and they said, this is what's happened, what do you think? And I was like, I don't know, what's your advice? You got any advice for me? And Dad just said, every good thing that's happened in my life happened when I took a risk. And so we pushed forward, and I remember coming back, and I did an appearance at Willie Primary School with Nathan Robat, Tippy, and that was a weird sort of realisation, and there was a lot of media there, and I sensed straight away when they started interviewing me there was a bit of animosity, not like vicious, but they were very sceptical.
Yeah.
And I could handle myself in front of the media, so I'm not sure if that lent them to be a little bit more honest with their questioning. Yeah. But I sensed straight away there was a strange sort of...
That's interesting. So because I think the accepted view in the industry is when the media are dealing with players, particularly young players, when they're 18 to pick a number, 23, 24, they're pretty gentle. They don't like to push them too far. Do you feel like you were afforded that grace?
I think it's probably twofold. Like I said, I think I could handle myself. I had significant media experience, so I think that probably maybe cost me a couple of years of grace. But I think once my deal went through, that kind of voided my youth a little bit.
Yep.
Because all of a sudden, I was a significant pillar in the club, and I was a player expected of, to be a real contributor, if not one of the best players in the team, excuse me, consistently. And because of that, obviously that sort of means that age is not a factor. And equally to that, there's always a few players who perform really well from a young age. Yep. And, like Bont's one of them, Kelly, and they were a couple of guys from my draft. Yep. So if I got the deal that I did, then at a minimum, I should have been on their level. Yep. And that's not the way the world works. But I think that's the way that the mindset of the footy world worked.
Yeah. There's, and I'm sure you know this better than I would, but there's a perception and we're going to talk a lot about perceptions today, and hopefully we'll break a few, and hopefully we'll smash a few other ones. But I think it's fair to say there is a perception with some that the big contract of $1 million a season, there, let's call it that, of that pressure alone is what brought the internal pressure on you, and that caused all of the problems. How do you sort of see that?
I mean, it's I've always described my issues as at least partially circumstantial, but definitely not entirely. I mean, you have to be honest with yourself about whether you're prepared to deal with it, or whether you're equipped to make sure that you are, your self-value has a relationship with something other than footy, which is a challenge when you're playing footy full time, particularly when you're living interstate and you don't have a lot outside the club. And I would also attribute it to, I remember one of the first things we spoke about was work-life balance, and you were really strong on that. That you didn't have to go to uni. It just had to be something that you enjoyed, whether it was riding or surfing or something that was somewhat fulfilling. And I think for a long period of time, because of my contract and draft status, I felt very obliged to be in the club every day, on my day off, not invest particularly outside the club. And I mean, I even remember in Sydney, there was a point in the pre-season where me and Josh Kelly got brought up in front of the group and sort of lauded for coming into the club every day, because we didn't have anything else to do. We were young players, and a few of the older boys who'd worked out how to have a better balance might have had a sore hammy and they couldn't train, but they weren't in the club getting treatment or whatever. And so that was sort of the back end that they got. And on the flip side, we got sort of encouraged to continue to act the way we were. So I think there's a few things. And certainly all of those are contributory, but it's hard to put an exact point on it. But
was there ever a thought of, when you sign on the dotted line and there's a lot of people around you, management and the support from the club, family, but was there ever? Did you have any trepidation of, it's a lot of money, what else comes with that?
Not really. I think I saw two things. Or maybe even three. I saw a chance to be the forward of the club, which I wasn't at the Giants. And it was going to be very difficult to break in. A lot of the guys who were drafted around my age were probably more considered assets than players. Not in a bad way, just they always had the chance to break in the team. Obviously Josh did and Cam did. But at that stage, they were still accumulating draft assets. And they already had Patton and Cameron, and they're really, really good players, and it was going to be difficult to break in. So that was part of it. The money was obviously part of it. I was young, and it was going to set me up for the rest of my life, and it obviously has. So it was a really important part of my decision, obviously. And finally, the most important one was just coming back to, because like I mentioned earlier, I felt like any issue that I was having at the time was basically due to homesickness, which is obviously not true. And footy is footy, and the AFL system is pretty
intensity of it.
Yeah, and it's pretty steady across the clubs. There's very little differences. besides, location and small schedule changes between the clubs for the most part, I would say.
When did you become sort of aware, or did you, so the homesickness umbrella is put away, was there the same feelings you had in Sydney here, or did it morph into something else, and were you even sort of aware of it, or is it just in hindsight that you sort of...
Yeah, it's funny. I think my first year I was probably not as critical on myself. That, a lot of the things that weren't going that right, I was kind of like, oh, we're not that good, or it's a team, or it's me. It was just, I probably deflected a bit, which for a little bit probably helped. But once in 2016, through that preseason, I had it was my best preseason. I was as fit as I was my whole career, and I think then I started to see that once you pay to play, then you get the disappointment if you've invested as much as I had. And I think that was hard for me. That was a bit, because even though I was seeing significant improvement in my game, it wasn't enough, and I didn't feel like it was enough, and the public weren't really giving me thinking it was enough. And ultimately it worked out really well that year, but if it hadn't, there would have been a lot of criticism at the end of that year anyway. And I think that's when I sort of was like, oh, geez, this is going to be hard work to try and get to the heights that I'm expected to get to.
How in tune were you with the outside noise? So were you someone who would read the paper, watch the various footy shows?
Not really. And I always, so I was cut off for a while. I got better as I got older, but there's a fickle relationship. If you just avoid it all, then the weight of the comments you do see, because you're going to see something, and you're going to hear something game day or in the street or wherever. And I was getting a lot of it in the public domain, particularly in person, where people would say stuff to me walking past, or
on the street. Yeah,
on the street, or definitely at games, even at training. Or,
can you remember an example of that?
Oh, it was always the same. I was like, oh, you're on $1 million.
Yeah,
whatever it was. It's a real nice buzzword. If I got paid 900, it might have been. There's a strange affinity with that price tag.
Did it get through? Would it cut into you?
Yeah.
Every time.
Even now it does. Yeah. Like, it's really frustrating, because I don't know. Yeah, I have a real issue with. I don't understand the relationship between people's character and their football. I mean, I've met a lot of good footballers whose character I'm not that big a fan of, and a lot of footballers who've struggled who are the best people I've ever met, and vice versa. I mean, it sort of
there's no set rule.
Forms. No, exactly. So, and I've always said to people, you hear anything 1,000 times and it starts to sink in a bit, and there's this interesting stat about. So we can speak at something about 130 words a minute, but you can think it over 1,000. And so when you hear something, you can hear it 50 times before you have another thought. So. I think over time it was, it weighed me down a lot. And I felt, it's just a strange contradiction, because I felt like I was a good person, and I'd always been told I was a good person. I invested in my people around me, good manners, good family, all that sort of stuff. And it didn't seem to count for much. So there was a strange sort of internal issue I was having.
I've always wondered, and I've always thought that particularly with the life of a league footballer, that everyone gets hit at various points, whether it be in the media, social media, whatever it is. Once you've been hit once, the waiting to be hit is worse than and I use the word hit, but a bit like what we talked about before, where something gets through, that a blade gets through and it sort of offends you. Did you have a sense of, were you sort of bracing constantly for the waiting to be
in public,
hit by something?
Yeah, in public I definitely was. I mean, even in games, I feel like at times I was listening, because I knew there was something coming. But yeah, I think mostly with mental health and with football, it's the chronic sort of battle of attrition that's the challenge, particularly with this stuff. And for me, it was probably the death by 1,000 cuts more than. And I was getting it a lot. So. Some people will say, that's just part of the deal. It's part of the contract. This is what you signed up for. And to a degree, I don't necessarily disagree. And I don't think each person was a bad person for saying something. That's really sort of not something I would consider at all. But if they could see the sort of the
toll,
the whole picture, I think they would think differently.
Yeah.
Because when you put it all together, it's a lot.
Yeah.
So
can I talk about, so when you first arrived at the club, that, I mean, everyone wears a mask of some sort, and I think the football thing heightens that. I think it's slowly changing, but there was definitely there's still a hangover from 100 years of being, don't show you're hurt. And I had the sense when you got here that you were a bit standoffish, that you were very serious for a young man. I thought, and you're proud in your performance clearly, but there was almost at times there was almost a coldness. You were sort of a bit, and I now look back on that and wonder of how much tension you were sort of holding. Yeah,
I probably got similar feedback when I was in Sydney, and because I wasn't like that as a kid at all.
That's what I'm sort of curious about.
And I think the trying to contain your negative emotion, obviously, in part, limits your ability to show happiness as well. And I hadn't had a great time in Sydney in myself, and I'd had issues with trust to a certain point of view with different people within the organisation, and I didn't feel like I really wanted to open up, and I just sort of wanted to bide my time. And I think even over your time at the club, you would have seen me open up a lot and get a lot more comfortable. And the challenge is when people tell you that you need to sort of get involved, that they don't sort of always see why, and they can't see retrospectively into what you've been through, and they can't hear the internal talk that you're having inside you to understand what your motives are.
Yep.
And a lot of mine was, I just want to be the player that everyone wants me to be.
Yeah.
But you can't do it on an island. No. And that was something I learned. So, because when things were good and you're on an island, it seems okay, but there's nothing sort of, it's not how you to live, not a way to live your life.
I remember I would spend time thinking about you, and because at the club at that time was a lot different from the traditional football sort of masculinity, I would say. Luke being a different kind of coach.
Yeah. You being different.
I was a different kind of captain. Yeah. That group was very different. We were huggers, emotional, arms out. And I think it was probably a bigger adjustment for you than anyone. Does that kind of ring true?
It was almost a mirror reflection of what the Giants was like.
Yep.
Yeah. So it was a very good transition once I got transitioning.
Yeah.
But beforehand it was hard because, like I said earlier, the Giants was a ultra uber competitive environment at that time. There was so much unknown and insecurity in players because they were all so talented, but they weren't sure where they were going to land. Yeah. And that led to a sort of and I mean Leon being a little bit older than Luke and a lot different, really good coach, very good technically, really supportive off the field, but very masculine based at that time. We did a lot of physical work, and a lot of the stuff, for instance, the biggest change was we did a lot more footy here. That was the biggest change. It was all fitness, a lot of heavy lifting, and coming back here was it was a lot better once I got involved. But at the start, it was sort of a bit of a shock. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll jump forward a little bit. So grand final again. This is through the lens of public perception of this is young man, number one recruit, gets the huge contract, battles along, gets a hard time from media, from the public, plays in this history-making final series, and then plays the game of his life on grand final. They get the premiership. That's it. everything's fine. This will be clear blue skies.
Yeah.
What lens are you looking at through? What happens thereafter?
2016 was hard, particularly the back end. I don't know whether it was, my own self-criticism or my real sort of desire to play good footy or whatever it was. That was when I started having the majority of my issues. And our success, to a point, sort of covered it up and let me just ride the wave of everyone else's emotion to a certain degree. And I remember talk about key ideals, I think, that probably made it difficult for me to succeed in footy. I felt like once 2016 happened, that I would be left alone. Not that it would be easier, but I just feel like they'll just let me do my thing now. Just let me play.
Yep.
But often it's the reverse. And I mean, I've been compared to Tom Hawkins hundreds of times in my career, and I was a bit younger than him when I sort of had my breakout. Like he was my age now, I think 23. Yep. So everyone considered that the next year I'd kick 50 goals.
There's the line of the line on the graph.
But I had 6 weeks off and 2 surgeries, and couldn't run for 10 weeks.
I often wonder about that because people have asked me that you weren't able to sort of capitalise on that momentum. So straight away surgeries.
Yeah.
Unable to run, miss a whole chunk, and then sort of having to build it up again during that season.
And I mean, I would have done my shoulder, bad, good, or small incident, big incident throughout the year, probably 20 times.
Yeah,
like pretty much every week. And it sounds dramatic, but everyone who has a really loose shoulder will know the feeling.
Yeah,
taping can only do so much. Once you get tired, your muscles stop holding it in. And anyway, so I pushed through all that, like most players do, but then because we went so late in the season, and it was an October 2nd or something, it was October 1st, whatever. It was a late grand final even by AFL standards, and then, like I said, 6.5 weeks off and no time. I mean, 6 weeks in the sling when you have a posterior, when your arm's sort of sitting up in front of you, you don't get any respite. And I had a lot of pain after my surgery, and you just end up feeling like you never stopped. And then, the biggest thing that young players need in the start of their career is, continual training through preseason. Yep. And I'd had intermittent sort of up until then, and I'd had a massive preseason 2015-16, and that's what set me up to have a good year. And that's what held me in good stead, particularly at the back end of the year. But then I barely trained. Yep. And it was the same this year, 2018. I didn't train at one preseason session, and then I did rehab because of my back. So there's no golden ticket to playing good footy. You have to do preseason, even if it's just most of it. It's just that continual turning up and training and getting the run in your legs and your body right. And I mean, even I remember you at the end of your career, you weren't training all the time, but you were consistently out there. Whatever it was, 2 days a week.
Whatever it was a routine.
Yeah, it was always. It was never take 10 days off. No, that doesn't work. So, that's the stuff that people don't see because they just see the results during the year. But if you don't train, it's near impossible. You have to be very, very good.
35,000 to a game, 12 to training.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I've got. I don't know if this is jumping around a bit, but when talking about mental health and we've dealt with it a lot here. When I say we've dealt with it, of players who've put up their hand to say you need to step away. So all clubs are dealing with it on a varying degree, and all players are dealing with it on some kind of level. I would say, but I do remember when a teammate of ours, Travis Cloak, got up in front of the group and put his hand up and said, struggling in this area, going to take a bit of time. And the next day he looked visibly to me like a weight was taken off his shoulders. And then when your turn came to speak to the group, I didn't feel like in the days and weeks after there was a weight off. If anything, it was almost like the darkness had descended. Is that... Yeah. Can you explain that? Is that close to the mark, or how can you explain that to me?
Well, for your point about Trav, one of the hardest things for me was I'd been thinking about doing it for a long time.
Yeah.
And Trav delayed me because I didn't want it to seem like the Dogs having like a pandemic of mental health issues. So Lisa said to me, our psychologist, she said, did that feel good, like hearing someone? I'm like, no. Now I feel trapped even more. I can't do anything. I'm not going to do it the next day. I was like 2 key forwards at the Dogs, just taking time off. I'm not sure. I don't know Trav's story enough to speak for him, but when I took time off, I physically couldn't go any longer. Yep. Like it was as much mental as physical, and the toll that not sleeping and anxiety and stress or whatever it is that you're having, the physical toll to turn up and play footy is nigh impossible. And my cycle through 2017 particularly, and to a point at the end of 2016, was basically not sleep 2 days out from a game and then play and then just be wrecked for 3 or 4 days until I started it again. I'd feel all right by Wednesday and then straight back into that cycle. So that wasn't sustainable. I was actually playing some pretty good footy. I started rucking a bit more, and the games I wasn't enjoying, but I felt like my performance was
holding your own.
And I sort of was starting to get a bit more of the ball, and I had added another sort of feather to my cap, playing a bit more ruck, and but I slowly but surely I was just deteriorating. Then I had a calf injury and my back started going, and you just can't avoid not sleeping. It's not possible. So when I took time off, I was going very badly, and I needed that time. And I didn't take that long away from the club. I think it was only a couple of weeks or something, but I needed some time to stop the cycle of what I was doing so that I could start building back up.
When you had your time away, what would a garden variety day look like?
Seeing the psych twice a week, I think. I was still training, but I was down at Anglesey with Anna pretty much. Yeah.
How would you describe your emotions during that time? Were you sort of just vacant because of the fatigue, or were you upset?
Nah, probably vacant more so. I'd had some really low moments, but from when I took time off, I was just trying to re-energise myself pretty much. And one of the most common things for people when they're having mental health issues is to withdraw. And so I was really lucky to have good support around me and people to make sure that I was still engaged. And to a large degree, I think that helped a lot. Yeah. But you also don't need to be in an environment where there's 50 blokes who know you're not feeling that good. So I just needed a couple of weeks to sort of re-energise myself. And to a large degree, I think that 2 weeks and then the following, I can't remember how many games, I missed 6 or something. That period allowed me to just reset and get some time. And I think if you think about my timeline from the grand final to there, it's pretty much, like I said, no time off. And I think that was contributory. We all need a break mentally to refresh, and particularly if you were, not enjoying it like I was for a sort of quite a long period of time. And then recharge the batteries, and since then I've been pretty good. So
I'm curious, where did the ability to sort of be able to articulate it and share your feelings come from? So the kid that I met who walked into the club, who was, like I say, very standoffish and had the mask on, and you had an inherent sort of tension of I'm okay, to the man sitting in front of me now, but even before today. Is that just from working with psychologists? Is that conversations with Anna, with teammates? Where did you find the vulnerability?
Well, I've explained it to a lot of people as so there was so many people said, "Oh, he's so brave for speaking out," or whatever. But I'm not. I don't feel that way at all. I mean, so for me, I'd missed the most footy I ever had with this stuff, and it felt like I had an injury. So from the practicality point of view, it's just logical, and I could just associate myself with this is real, injury, mental health, whatever. So when I went about articulating it was never difficult for me to explain because it was so obvious to me and so clear what was going on. But from a specific point of view, a lot of conversations with psychs and a lot of research myself, a lot of interest in this field, I think has led me to have some reasonably good philosophies around, where we're at as a society, what it means to you, how it affects you, how everyone's different, how some things work for others, some things don't, some things affect people, some things don't. So I think just time, experience, and just probably just an interest in it, to be honest. So I've spoken about...
Feel better from talking about it?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that's where me feeling better came from, but I enjoy speaking about it. I particularly enjoy speaking to younger people about it because one of the clear things to me was that I didn't know about it, and if I had, maybe I've been able to change some things. Yeah, and I mean, these things tend to be, the monster in the closet you don't deal with until it's all over, or you've gone through something severe, but you can deal with it every day. I mean, we all do, and you need to invest time in it, and you need to find out what works for you, and you need to experiment, and you have to learn that over time. But you do have to invest time in it. That's probably my biggest thing that I learned. So,
how significant was the back injury? Yeah,
it was pretty bad. I actually felt like I managed my mental health well through my back injury, but it was debilitating. I think it was 9 months.
Chronic pain?
Yeah, so just a gradual spiral over 3 years. I mean, I've had back injuries and issues since I was 15. Discs. My mum had a discectomy. There's a history of back injuries in my family. And I think just over time, played a lot of basketball, a lot of jumping, a lot of impact, bigger kid. I think just over time, it just sort of wore me down. And then we just never could get on top of it. I remember having conversations with Chris Bell, the head medical guy here, and we just sort of we couldn't stop the cycle. It was just always, we're trying to pull you out of this, and then I'd be like, I feel a little bit better, but then next week it wasn't quite the same.
Still can't find a routine rhythm.
And the thing I've learned about discs in particular, which is and I think we learned about it, all of us here, particularly with chronic disc issues. You need to keep them moving. You just always, unfortunately, going through pain is part of it. But if you withdraw and avoid the pain starts following you down the rabbit hole, So I was really against taking medication, always have been, in terms of the anti-inflams and all that stuff. It just always had a diminishing return. So I was not big on that, and I was trying to find methods to manage it otherwise. And so for 6 or 8 weeks at the end of 2018, I was in bed pretty much every day. I couldn't move, which didn't help. Staying in bed's not the answer. No. So that was rough. And I don't think anyone realised what was going on, because I didn't train at all. If I had a back spasm, which was probably once every 2 days, I'll swim. That was it. That was all I could do. So like I said earlier, I didn't train until about round 1 this year, and then I was trying to chase something that I wasn't going to get, and I didn't feel like I had the drive to apply myself and go through all that stuff all over again. So and that was part of it. I mean, I didn't feel right. I didn't feel authentic playing through something I didn't want to do. And I'd thought about retiring. I was pretty certain I was going to do it at the end of this year anyway. So when it sort of came to a head with my back, I was like, I'm not going to just take a paycheck for the next 6 months. And for all the people that are here that have supported me, and a really important part of my life, and for a large degree, I think we're probably one of the biggest family clubs for whatever reason. I mean, I haven't had that much experience in other clubs, but I feel like there's somewhat of a relationship, a real priority for relationships here, and that's great. But also it means that you have to be authentic, and that's sort of where I landed.
Let's talk a little bit more about perception. So you'd flagged publicly about your battle with mental health, and we even sat in this very spot and talked about and we talked about it, and then I'm not sure, so it would have been 6 to 8 months later that you retired from football. And I think a lot of people assumed that the battle with mental health is the sole reason why he's finished playing football. But that's not the sense that I get from you. That
no, not at all.
It's not the reason, but it's almost that the injury and losing the hunger just to play. Is that? Can you capture it better than that?
Yeah, I mean, so we had a conversation the other day before we were deciding to do this, that there was a 250-word statement put out from me, and there was one line about mental health, and in that line was physical health as well. So, but that was all that got extrapolated from that statement, and that's not surprising. I mean, I wish I'd changed it, but ultimately, I think that's where the media are going to land regardless. I wasn't having issues with mental health at this time. I was significantly physically unable because of my lack of pre-season and lack of desire to do the things that I needed to do to perform at a high level, and that led me to be a hell of a long way from being back to playing at my best footy, and I didn't feel like I wanted to get back there. So for a long period of time I hadn't enjoyed it, and I tried to change a lot of stuff. And I mean, there's always that great quote about Einstein, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing and expecting different results. And at some point, I got to the stage where I was like, it's not fair me going home to Anna 3 out of 4 days, not happy with footy. Yeah. It's just not fair. So I've tried changing X, tried changing this, I've tried changing my structure, the way I approach it mentally. I had a much better relationship in terms of my internal value and sort of where I found my self-reference and all that sort of stuff. But it was still the same stuff to a degree with footy, that I didn't appreciate the lack of value that you got for your input during the week, and how isolated your value was on your performance, which is the way that our world works. That's the way that the job is. And I'm not bitter about the way the job is. I was just very frank and very pragmatic that I don't want to live in an industry that
makes you unhappy.
Yeah, that makes me unhappy. So, and I was starting to find things outside of a footy that I was like, this is what I want to do. You know, I want to go to uni. I want to learn. I'll get involved in business. I want to be, involved with footy at a lower level where I can just turn up and enjoy myself and be a part of a community and wash my hands at the end of the day, go home and have a beer and go to bed, So I think all of those things started to become more and more apparent to me over probably the last 2 years, particularly as I matured into a stage where I could make a decision sort of this magnitude. And
was there immediate relief? So different to when you spoke to the group when I was there of your battle, and that I described that it didn't feel like the weight was lifted off your shoulders, but with the retirement, did you feel a sense of?
I sort of felt like it had been a long time coming, So I'd spoken to Zimmer about it in pre-season because I was really doubting with my back whether it was worthwhile. And he just said, look, mate, get back to some sort of fitness. Try and get back out playing footy. And if you still don't want to, then make a decision there. Never make a decision in rehab or when you're having a rough time with injury or any of that stuff. And that really resonated with me. So I fully applied myself to getting back. I got back and I was like, it's still the same. Nothing's changed. And like I said, I'd started to find things that stimulated me. And I was... a really academic kid, and for a lot of my footy, I couldn't really use it. So I was excited by that prospect. I felt like it was the right time for me to make the decision for my life, and I walked up there and spoke to the group when I retired, and it was easy. I knew it was going to be hard at some point, and I mean the first few weeks were awesome, and then after that it was a bit boring. But once uni got kicked back in, I was like, this is great. Everything I do, I'm getting up and I'm choosing to do this. I'm doing it with purpose. I'm purposely going to uni. I'm purposely going to speak to schools, or I'm purposely going to footy training rather than here's your schedule, turn up and do it. So the choice you get back in your life is very liberating. And I feel like I did as much due diligence. I was as prepared as possible. And I'd given it as much thought as I could possibly have given it over the past 6 years to make a decision with a clear mind, you know.
So what next for Tom Boyd? You see, this is the happiest I've seen you. The most, maybe happy's probably the wrong choice of words. The most at ease, most comfortable in your own skin. Does that ring true?
At ease is, yeah. And I mean, it hasn't been without its challenges. I mean, not having stuff on and not feeling like you need to do something is very difficult, particularly when for all players that even in the off season, you basically give yourself a week and a half or 2 weeks to shut off, and then you're like, okay, now we get the wheels, we get rolling again. So for a couple of weeks, I was sort of very unsure, and I sort of had a bit of guilt about. I was like, I don't have anything to do today, and I was trying to fill my schedule as much as I could. And I had a lot of things in the works and a lot of things coming, but I couldn't accelerate their timeline per se. So, but then once I got over that hump, I was like, okay, I can, I've got the day off. I want to go to the beach, go surfing, or go visit friends, or whatever it is. And once I got to that stage, and then now that I've got a sort of pretty full schedule with sort of a bit of work and uni and stuff, it's it's very very satisfying.
And you're doing some speaking. Is the work in mental health, is that something you think a path you'll go down? Is there a passion there to help people, or is it just is it just part of closure for you at the moment?
No, I mean, so there's two parts to it. I mean, so I'm doing quite a bit of stuff with younger people, and I've always had with footy and schools and youth groups or local footy clubs throughout the journey. I've always found that to be sort of where a real passion of mine lay. And for me, looking at the atmosphere or the environment of the mental health in Australia at the moment, we've come a long way in 5 years, like a long way, particularly with awareness, particularly with the traction that a lot of these campaigns and sort of groups have come up with, so that everyone understands that it's a problem and that it has been a problem for a really long time, but we've never really dealt with it seriously. And we've got the Royal Commission coming next year. There's big changes happening from a government level, and there's a lot more talk and understanding in this space. But I feel as though there's a bit of a shift, in my opinion, that can happen in terms of practicality, and here's some things that work, and be a bit more proactive. And it's not about, okay, how do you deal with mental health? It's like, how do we proactively curate our own mental well-being? Yeah. And from a young person's point of view, being only 23, I really wish I knew some of this stuff when I was younger. Yep. And like I said earlier, I really feel it could have helped me. And through my experiences, from a general point of view, I like to give just a little bit of an insight into what worked for me, and talk about fulfillment and balance and enjoyment, all that sort of stuff, connectivity with the people around you. So I feel there's some merit in it. I've had really good responses from people, and I have for quite a while. Obviously, after speaking out in 2017, I've had a lot of feedback, and some good, some bad, but for the most part, I feel like it's landing, and and people are really receptive to it. So that's something I really enjoy. Whether it's a career option remains to be seen. I think I'll definitely involve myself in business as well, because I feel as though my experiences can help in that area as well. There's a lot of change happening in the business sector, and we've seen a significant amount of change even at the footy club in the last 5 or 6 years. And we've got a way to go, but we're making some really good strides, and I'm enjoying sort of, for the small part that I play, being a bit a part of it. So.
And what about the local football? Is there? You talked about the enjoyment of the simplicity of it. Going back, and have you found joy playing the game again?
I found freedom, I would say.
It's a good word, freedom.
Yeah, it's a funny experience going back there. I mean, this is a club that I've played at since I was 8 years old, or 7 or 8 years old. My dad coached me there. My dad was captain coach in a premiership there in 1989. Played 180 games or something like that. My best friends all played there. My best friends' dads all played there. So when I go back, for the first couple of weeks, it was exhausting because everyone knew me. And I'd spent time watching them particularly this year, but all through the last 5 or 6 years, I always loved going back and watching them play. But then once I sort of got settled in, it was very liberating. It's very sort of comfortable, besides the fact that you have to sit in traffic for an hour and a half to get out there during the week. But it is it's a different world. There's a real value on people. There's a real value on people that participate and invest in the club, regardless of their, job level or, skill level. As long as you're there and investing time, I think everyone's sort of on an even plane, that feels authentic to me. It's sort of the nirvana of footy.
Yep. Well, thanks for sharing. As always, I love our chats. I think freedom kind of captures a nice sentiment of where you're at now. You're a significant person in this club's history, but I think you're, more importantly, probably you're a significant voice in this area that's affecting a whole lot of people. But I just want to, on behalf of the footy club, thank you for your services to the club. But thanks for sharing, and all the best, mate.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.